then just pointed out that when someone said to her, like, what are you doing in the summer? She was like, well, it's not really summer, it's life. And I was like, oh, shit. And I was like, I'm not really going to have like a job. I'm not going to see my friends anymore. And so this tantrum happened. And my mom was like, no, Sheila, don't worry, it's okay. I'm sure some of them will still get drunk and go to KFC, so it's fine. And I was like, oh, thanks, Mom. But no, really, I won't just be unemployed next year. Like, I'm going to be unemployed to fuck. Like, and I know that's not the most, like, eloquent use of the English language you've ever heard, but, like, I am unemployed to fuck. Like, if I stood in the middle of the motorway holding my degree, people would probably stop and throw money at me, because it's effectively the same as holding up, like, a will work, do anything for food sign. Like, but you know, it is a good thing that I am leaving behind, finally, any of my embarrassing moments. Like, suddenly they go all into the void, so thank God. But it's not the same, like, for everyone. Like, at least I won't have to live through for the next 2 or 3 years, like, pissing myself on a bus, pissing into a bottle on a bus. Bit of a theme here for you, Fitzgibbon. Showing pictures of my dad at events to people, shame on Canadian. Vomiting at court while your boyfriend is in tighty whities. Like, trying to roast me, Scarlett. But you will have to remember all of those embarrassing moments for like 2 or 3 more years. So I'm okay with going. The only one thing that I will hold on to though is when I was in first year and I went to Galway and I walked in my pajamas and deemed myself the cozy fresher. I am okay with holding on to that title for the rest of my life. So from the cozy fresher, there being no further business to be adjourned.
Are there any objections to me signing these minutes as true and accurate records of the last private business meeting? There being none, I shall duly sign. Mr. Treasurer, are there any fines?
There are a couple of fines, actually. The following people pay Chris for Sunday if they want to vote for one election. So, John Schwartz, Conor Hooley, Ada Hogan, Lee Tom Sweeney, Grace Meyer, James Gallagher, Kate Clanley, Katie O'Brien, Liam Smith, Mark Sheen, Matthew Newton, Patrick Ward, Mark O'Leary, and Mike Nolan. That's all. Tenure.
sitting in her seat. Harry.
Uniform of the private school, okay, yeah. Hold on, right. Get around. Okay. We'll get. Hope this is connected up now. There we go, a bit. One up now. Can you hear that? Yeah, you can. All right. Gonna get in the zone. Hold on now. Don't be looking like that, Ken Henry. Hi, is what's the story? Jazzy K is me name. Roberto is me hobby and Regin is me game. I look around the room and everybody's in a suit, and McBride over there is trying to give me the boo. The session of the Phil has been the best you've ever seen, and that's cause I've been the whopper Phil Quinn. I made yous all laugh when we talked about terrorism, put me in a comic cause I'm a bleeding heroine. And now we all know Connor'll take the top position. He'll be Scarlet like Mariah at a singing competition. But the one thing that makes me a little less bitter is the fact that the freshers they seem to be getting fitter. Scarlet. Say nothing. I don't fancy them. One thing I'll miss is the Thursday nights out and the hilarious things that come from people's mouths like, I'm pro schools of 332. Okay, come down off the stairs now, Hugh. We're in Mackie D's while the cashier gives us food. Love, I want nuggets, not your poxy attitudes. We're coming to the last two lines now. Stop crying, it's okay. When I leave here, it'll be nice to be free, but I'll still come back to roast 333. Lads, stay whopper, Jazzy KO, and for the last time, there'll be no further business. The meeting was bleeding adjourned.
So welcome everyone to the Phil, where the motion before the House is this House believes that an individual can change the world. Speeches are 7 minutes in length. After the first minute of each speech, there will be a bell, and after this, speakers and members of the audience are free to offer points of information right up until the last minute of the speech. Just point your attention to the orator returns sheets on your seats. These go towards rating the best speaker in the chamber to be awarded the Gold Medal of Oratory at the end of the year. So please hand these to Mark and Clodagh on your way out of the debate. Let's go to the speaking order. On the proposition bench, we have Amy O'Sullivan, who's a junior sophomore in English and History. We have Sheila Naughton, who's a senior sophomore in Theatre Drama Studies. We have Stefan Lavrock, who's a senior sophomore in Human Health and Disease. And we have Christopher Costigan, who's a junior sophomore in History and Political Science. Here. On the opposition bench, we have Cian Henry, the junior sophomore in Law and Business. We have Shannon Buckley-Barnes, who's a senior sophomore in Law and Political Science. James Gallagher, who's a junior sophomore in History and Politics. And then we have Anna Nichols, who is a senior sophomore in Law and Political Science. So without any further ado, we'll start the debate. So I'd like to call on Amy O'Sullivan to open up the case for this proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I actually forgot I was doing this speech, and last night I remembered and I was talking to my mum, and my mum was like, oh, you should, use examples to back your points up. So I was like, oh yeah, seems solid. So she was like, think of individuals who've like changed the world, and I was like, okay. And she was like, Genghis Khan, talk about him. I was like, no. So not the vibe. So what I'm going to talk about in this speech is what I think that the world is, why it's important that you should be able to believe that you can make changes in the world, and then some examples of the change. So like, what do I think the world is, and how do I like conceptualize it? So when you say something like the world, you think it's like really, really big. You kind of imagine like this globe in the sky. But the way that I tend to like visualize the world is I kind of see it as a story. So I see how I like visualize stuff is I see stuff like arguments as having like, instead of points, like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when two people I don't know have an interaction and I didn't realize when two people I know who I didn't know knew each other have an interaction, I always think it's like a funny intersection of what I thought were two separate stories. So I see just everyone as like bopping along as the main character in their own story. So when you think of it like that, the world is really just millions and millions of different stories who like intersect and interlink with each other. So if you think about it like that, it's much easier, I think, to imagine you shaping a story and shaping lots of different stories than it is imagining like the world. So instead of having like an individual and the world, you have an individual and like grouping of loads of different individual stories. So when you realise that, you realise it's actually quite easy to change the world because you're able to change stories all the time, and you can be an agent for change in other people's stories. And I think it's really important to believe you can make a change, because sometimes you feel really alone and you feel really ineffective. The loneliest I think I've ever felt was after one of the first council meetings this year, and I realised like loads of my friends were away, and what I thought the feel wasn't actually what the feel was going to be this year, and it was a really overwhelming feeling. And then there's also the feeling of like the fact that bad things happen all the time, and the news is generally just really depressing. So I think you can like do three things when you're faced with that. You can either block it out, you can do nothing, or you can try to enact change. And that's why I believe we have to believe that we can make a change to the world, because we don't believe we can enact change, then we're not going to even try, which is bad on a personal note, because you just kind of fall into apathy or apathy, I don't know how you pronounce that word, and also like on a broader level. And I think when you think about the people who are most effective for change, it is actually an individual, because when you think about stuff that's made that's really beneficial, it tends to be one person noticing a gap in the market. So like the Food Cloud charity are this charity that they noticed that loads of food in bars and restaurants were going to waste, and there was obviously a massive shortage of food for homeless people and like people who are vulnerable, and those people went and they were like, okay, that's a problem, we have loads of food here and not enough here, and they made this app called Food Cloud, and Food Cloud makes sure that all the surplus foods gets distributed to people who need it. Another example is like the DePaul charity, which are not like Vincent de Paul, and this one man realised that there's a problem in that people with addiction problems couldn't be in hostels because hostels have a no drink policy. So he set up these a wet hostel, and then he set up another wet hostel, which is where you can like drink, but they try to manage your drink, so for people who aren't able to give up drink, they deserve to be helped too. But the thing that really struck me as where an individual could change the world was in terms of schools debating. So I did a lot of schools debating this year, and I think it's something that's really, really beneficial and helps enact change, and you only need one person to enact that change in the world. Because for a lot of people, college is really weird and it's really inaccessible, and you don't really go into college unless you're like in a school in Dublin or you have family who've been to college. So when you're someone from your school, someone goes to your school who's been in college, then college isn't just a place where like strange people go that you don't know. It's like you can put a face to the person who's come to college, and that's much better. It's just like not as scary as weird normal people go to it. And then again, when you bring school children who are like mightn't be from one of the schools that like goes to colleges loads into the college, and they see that the people in it are like relatively normal people, it's also really beneficial in terms of critical thinking, because you're not taught critical thinking in schools, and you're not taught how important it is to be able to articulate a point in front of a room. The first time I tried to debate in a debating module in fourth year, I literally like had black spots in front of my eyes. I was so terrified, and like I still get terrified every time I speak, but because I had the opportunities to do it more and more, I'm now better able to do stuff like this where I stand in front of a room full of strangers. So it's really important, like when you're in a workshop and at the start everyone is looking at their shoes and they're really nervous, and then gradually they start to speak out, and sometimes there's this moment where someone who hasn't talked at all at the start says something of their own accord and you haven't even called upon them, where they start arguing something because something's been triggered in that. And then that's a really great moment, because you realise that you or whoever's facilitating it has helped them realise their potential, and that you individuals has guided, and that makes them better able to enact change in the world, because I think the world is like a ripple effect. And if you're lucky, which is what happened to me this weekend, you'll see them again at a different debating competition, and you realise that they've kept it up and they're still able and confident to like talk in front of people, I guess. So then if you think about it on another individual level, is like individuals inhabit their own spheres, and so it's like every person's life is like the world of them being the main character in their story. So if you think about someone who you know has influenced you, who you've never told, so it might be a close family member. For me, it was like a hockey coach who was really important to me, who I never told how important they were to me, because I was like 15 and I was like, God, I couldn't do that, that would be awkward. So I think we need to be able to believe so we can speak out, so that if we're in a group and someone says something mean, we can like have enough courage to enact the change that we want to see in those group dynamics. Example of this was when I was debating with Mike in Cork 2 years ago. I thought we'd done really well, and then we came fourth, and this judge was giving this feedback, and the judge only looked at Mike and he didn't look at me once, and I was like, oh, that's that was weird. And Mike was like, no, that's not okay. That was really gender judging and you shouldn't be allowed to be treated like that. And then instead of me feeling bad about myself, we were able to go to someone and be like, this bad thing happened. And I was just much more confident as I went on in later debating to just be like, no, that's not me. That's just the fact that dating is quite sexist. And that was really important to me. So we're able to equip people to make their world that they live in a much better place, which when you think about the world just being loads of like many different worlds means that overall the world is a better place. So like, you can make a change. You can be the person who throws the first rock. You can be the person who says, actually, I don't think that joke was nice, and make someone who's being laughed at a lot better. You can be someone who gives your time to a small thing, that knowing that you're making those people's stories a lot better. You can be the character in a story who changes the shape of the character's story. That's a wonderful thing to do, and if we don't believe we can do that, then I think we'll all just be really sad. Thank you.
Salutations, the Phil. Imagine that all of human history was a cylinder, and suppose that we could slice through this cylinder at any given point and inspect the resulting cross-section. Before even looking, we can be certain of some things that we will find. For example, we will find that in this period, the vast majority of people spend most of their time working to survive for an amount of pay below that which they truly produce. This occurs to the benefit of a small ruling elite. The interests of this elite are protected by the state, which in whatever form it exists, uses routine and systemic violence to maintain this situation. In recent decades, I think there's a growing sense that the world is changing, but there is also a sense in which the key elements have not changed at all. In 2012, it was reported that $240 billion was added to the fortunes of the world's richest billionaires. This amount was enough to end extreme poverty 4 times over. Closer to home, Dublin is home to 21,000 units of property which are vacant. This means that every night, for every homeless person in Dublin, there are 13 properties which sit completely empty. The orthodox answer to these problems is that they are random aberrations or unfortunate byproducts in the context of things generally getting better. The answer is that capitalism will grow economies until need is eventually eliminated. But if this were true, then I would accept that individuals working within this system can deliver the kind of change required. But it's not true. Over the last few decades, economic productivity has grown, but all it's done is put money in the pockets of rich capitalists. For all the greater hours they've worked, people's real wages have stagnated while rents have skyrocketed. The conflicts I'm describing cannot be resolved within capitalist society precisely because they are the most central, most essential product of capitalist society. This society is characterized by the conflict between capital and labor, between employer and employee. And the problem isn't that all these employers, as you might flippantly think, are bad or malicious people on some kind of individualized level. The problem is that even if exceptionally compassionate and honest individuals replace these leaders, they would be subject to the same kind of powerful incentives. The central rule of the market is that every business owner must turn a profit, otherwise their business will be eliminated by its competition. In this context, even the most charitable boss can only see labour as a cost, their workers as a cost. And to survive, they have to pay them the minimum wage possible for every unit of work that they do, otherwise they will be undercut. Individuals cannot change this scenario precisely because the market system pits those individuals against one another. All of this plays right into the hands of those at the top, where wealth becomes concentrated. This power of capitalists is redoubled as they use this money to lobby politicians, bureaucrats, and even the general public until their interests are incredibly well protected, almost beyond reproach. They can also use their market power to exclude competition, like the oil companies who receive massive subsidies combined to prevent the success of renewable energies. This is why individual efforts, while extremely commendable and useful in managing the symptoms of this injustice, can never actually overcome the root cause of it. When large corporations attempt to tackle issues like gender and LGBT diversity in the workplace, they must be commended for this. Insofar as these corporations exist, these policies are indispensable and their absence is inexcusable. However, we must also be skeptical of the liberal idea that promoting more tolerant, cosmopolitan, and diverse individuals to the top of these structures will truly change those structures. No matter what the ideological standpoint of these people, they will be subject to the same stresses and pressures to make profit as anyone else is. Perhaps the truth is that the politics of representation, as worthy as they might be on some level, don't truly threaten the interests of the powerful. Corporations like Microsoft and Samsung, which makes tens of billions of dollars a year, may look slick and shiny and modern, but the truth is that they rely on 40,000 child labourers in the southern Congo to pick cobalt for their phones. Those people are paid $1 to $2 a day. They're often 7-year-old children. It is on this activity that the profitability of these companies relies, because they have an incredibly cheap source of labour. Change will only occur when this method of production, therefore, is no longer profitable. Thus, it is not individual but collective action which is required to end these kind of oppressive practices, most often in the form of boycotts or strikes, the withdrawal of consumption or the withdrawal of labour. Companies can circumvent individual change efforts, but not collective ones which target their core profitability. This is where the power lies, I believe, in the collective. In Dublin, over the last few years, we've seen a series of strikes by industrial workers whose wages have not kept pace with rising costs of living. As Lewis drivers, bus drivers, Tesco staff and Gardaí striked for basic, overdue increases in pay, a media controlled by powerful interests attempted to sow discord and division in these movements, undermining them. Take the Irish Independent, owned by Dennis O'Brien, which published a series of inflammatory articles about the striking Lewis drivers, convincing readers that they were out to get your money. Instead of seeing wage increases of others, maybe in a moment, instead of seeing the wage increases of others as a conduit to achieving wage increases across the board, people were manipulated into seeing it as a race to the bottom, whereby anyone seeking more wages was greedy. Just one moment, Seba. On the face of it, this is just people looking out for themselves and their own interests. However, by failing to recognise the interconnected nature of our interests, we are all undermined. While companies like billion-euro company French multinational Veolia, owner of the Lewis, is actually the one who wins big from this kind of infighting. Yeah.
In a world where individuals don't believe that they can make a change, how do you get the kind of like vanguard intellectuals and activists that would presumably change the things that you want in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not that I believe that people can't make a change. It's just, I think we differ on the manner in which people can make a change. Obviously, I believe that people should believe in their own capacity to change things. It's just they shouldn't go about it in an individualized manner. I'm going to talk about this more, but I think that, like, the way in which they conceive of change should be more solidarity-based. Yeah, sorry, this isn't a very optimistic speech, but I'm against the kind of empty optimism that you hear sometimes. I think I am an optimist in other ways. It's just, we shouldn't look at someone who's incredibly oppressed and like admire their work ethic. We should look at the system which has forced them to do something like that. Look, I realise that it might seem strange to bring these ideas to this forum, and equally I realise that I won't have converted a room full of people to socialism in a 7-minute speech. But in another sense, it's important that these ideas are heard in a quite privileged forum in which class conflicts have traditionally been overlooked. The Phil is full of smart, ambitious and idealistic people, and colleges in general, many of whom are getting terrifyingly close to embarking on their careers. If nothing else, this speech might be a reminder that social movements don't need 1,000 more self-styled leaders. The flaws of our society can't be engineered away by legions of managers come architects, no matter how visionary those people are. Sometimes what's needed is basic humility and solidarity with those who are marginalised. In sum, we cannot hope to cure the ills of society as long as we view ourselves as a collection of individuals in competition rather than as a community. Thank you.
Hold for a second round of applause. Hold for a second. Oh my God. Thank you. Stand up. Thank you. Stand up. Thank you. Oh my God, don't stand up, sit down. Thank you so much for this award. I never ever thought I'd be standing up here in front of you all receiving the Oscar for Best Actress. I really wasn't expecting this, although I have a speech prepared. I'd like to make a few thank yous. I would like to thank me, myself, my talent, my drive, my great boobs, my incredible audition ability, my incredible ability to take direction, and finally, God, because he's apparently the official sponsor of all Oscar speeches. And I would just like to say that I may never get the chance to stand up here and accept this again, but you know, if you can be the individual who changes the world of acting twice, I'll see you soon. No, but Lord, gee, the Oscars are going to fucking hate me. But no, tonight's debate, it looks at, it's very different than these ones we've just heard. Tonight's debate looks at the individual and whether they can change the world. And I guess I'm not really surprised to see some of the people on this side of the bench. I mean, like, well, Keane, he was last year's Reg. Yeah, I bet you didn't know that. Yeah. There's a reason for that. You know, if you saw like Michael McIntyre doing stand-up, you'd remember him because he made you laugh. Well, the same principle applies to Keane. It just manifested in a different way, in that we don't know who he is. Anyway, then there's James, and I mean, I understand why he's there, because he's going home to like America soon, so he's going to need the support of everyone when he gets back to that shitstorm of 4 years, so best of luck. And then we have Shannon. I was surprised to see her there, because like she has been changing the world. She's sifting through all the shitheads on Tinder and leaving the best ones for us, so the Lord's work, Shannon, the Lord's work. And then there's Anna. The individual changing the world. No, we get that one. That's okay. And now that I've offended everyone, I guess I'll just say some stuff. Anyway, so you're told your whole life by people that there is no I in team. And, well, sorry, people, by the jealous bitch who is not better than you, Liz. And, but no, they say there's no I in team, but there are lots of other words that there is I in. Innovative, creative, determined, aspiring, drive, Sheila, irrelevant but true. Ambition, intelligence, and individuality. All of these words are traits that many of the people in this room will possess either some or all of. I pointed the attention to words that have I in them because it is the individual who choose and their traits and the way they manifest themselves in each person differently that means that the individual can change the world. I do feel that sounds like this sweeping, idealistic sentence. You know, I can change the entire world. Shut up, Sheila. But what I mean is, like, I'm not talking about the person who establishes, like, world peace or something. I'm talking about changing the world around you. I'm talking about changing the sections of the world that you have access to and that you feel need or deserve change. As a person with your own mind and your own individual experience and understanding within the world, you have to believe that you can change things. At the beginning, I joked about getting an Oscar and only thanking myself, but the real point of that was that while we may thank others who help us along the way, and while the end product may be a movie that lots of people contributed to, it is each individual person who made the decision to be part of that work and work for something that is the reason that it became something bigger. Even if we look at the poster for tonight's event, which is dominoes falling, that is the perfect image to show how your individuality can change things. What happens if we take one of those dominoes out? Well, then the domino falls and the chain stops because there's nothing to keep it going. So often people, they refuse to involve themselves in things because they think, I won't make much of a difference, I am just one person. That is such an unfair statement on yourself because you are never just something. You could break that chain by removing yourself. I think that you're actually underselling yourself if you don't accept that your contribution to the world in whatever capacity is valuable and has the possibility to change something. I think of the Waking the Feminist movement that began with one short tweet because one individual was unhappy with the sexism they saw. That movement progressed and has changed the world of the arts abroad and in Ireland and has given me such hope that I will leave, no thank you, and be okay. And even if it hasn't changed enough, I now believe that I can go on to change it further. Looking at another event that we had here last week, which saw people speaking about mental health, one speaker really spoke to me. Her name was Clodagh Tracy, and she came up here and she spoke about overcoming her eating disorder. And while she got help from professionals, the real change in her world, the world that she could change, it was because of the strength inside her to overcome it. The other people simply helped that. It comes from the individual to change the world that they are in. When dealing with my own eating disorder, I feel quite powerless, and I have been depending on others to help me get better. But that's not how it works. I realise that the individual has to want the world to change, the world that they are in. And that kind of brings me on to my next point. The idea that when an institution isn't enough anymore because the government or religious organisations or the UN or whatever is overstretched, do we just say, all right, fair enough, lads? No, we don't. It is then that the individual's thought initiative can cause and force change where an institution is failing us. Look at through history. Like this is like Amy was told to do examples, so was I. Rosa Parks, to Emily Davidson, to Gandhi, side note, put him in everything, he always proves your point. But all these individual people sparked something when a group or organisation was not enough, and I think that what it all comes down to is that while our ideas and efforts may be improved with the help of a group or have more impact once the group emerges, the origin of the idea comes from an individual. And no matter what is said in this debate, and no matter what Cian says about it needing to be a group and an organisation, it still has to be the individuals within that want it to change, and that's why it's important. And every single individual within each group is valid and is proof that the individual can change the world. Finally, just onto my soppy kiss arse I love the Phil bit. So, when I think about all of the amazing people that I've met over the past 4 years in Trinity and the Phil, I know that the guys here can all go out and change or achieve something. Like, it's totally within your ability. The Phil is made up, as we heard already, of the most determined, intelligent and competent people that I've ever met. I think of the friends who I just slagged off earlier, but I think you're doing yourself such a disservice being on this side of the bench. Like, how do you not believe that you could actually make a change in the future? Why do you believe that? Like, even if the change affects the entire world, or it affects your world, or affects just one other person's world, isn't that enough? Like, I know some of you have changed the world that I've been in college, from encouraging me to come back to the Phil in first year, and meaning that I am now standing here, from encouraging me when to go and do reg, and now I don't even want to leave the role, to standing with me in a bathroom when I said that everything was shit and just handing me a bottle of wine and telling me that everything was going to be okay. That changed my world while I was in college. So while you might think that you can't change the world, I think if you even change one person, that's okay. So don't do yourselves a disservice of being on this side, because you're so much better than that. You can absolutely change it. It's so important to know that we all do this every day, whether we know it or not. We change the world in some way. We can't wait for people to just hand us things. And what's even better is that we don't have to, because we can do it ourselves. All that's left to say is it's been real. Thanks for amazing 4 years. And to bookend my speech, I'll end with the Oscars. No, don't play the music. I'm not done yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila, for fine words. And I'd like to call on Sean and Boogie Barnes to continue the case for the opposition.
Ooh. Ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen, Sheila just did the meanest tactic in debating, trying to make her opponent cry. That's just not on. Anyway, none of us are special, at least not on our own. At least not on our own. So I don't think it's possible for an individual to change the world, because the world consists, we've talked about a lot of conceptions of the world, and I think my conception really, with Amy's conception, is the world is a story and lots of individual stories. My conception is kind of just taking that an extra step further. I think that the world consists of all the connections that people have with each other and with the environment, and that the concept of world changes depending on the context. So we have our own individual worlds, which consist of our daily lives, our aspirations, and the systems that we ourselves operate within and who we interact with. Then the world, the understanding of the world gets changes as you become to look at the bigger picture and take more steps back. When you have scenarios such as what communities you're part of, different religions, the environment, politics. You could take all of this way back to deep space meaning of the world, but I think that's going a bit outside the remit of this debate, unless Stepan has some amazing knowledge of astrophysics that he's going to pop out in his speech. But what's important here is that whatever way you conceive of the world, it'll always consist to interconnected relationships. Because we are social creatures, as much as debaters we probably try to deny that. Our lives are based around interaction with other humans. And the ones in our houses, the ones in our workplaces, the ones in our town, country, even people in other countries that we haven't met yet. We're all kind of in this weird and wonderful journey of existence together. And so much of what we have to do, what we do, has ripple effects for others, even if they're on a small microcosmic level, or they have huge effects for the world. But how does the world being structured in this way stop an individual from changing it? So proper arguing that one person's actions can spark a series of events in motion, one person can be the leader of a huge campaign for change, one person can create something, I suppose, even if you have inventions and things, they can create something that changes the course of humanity. But I don't think that means that that change can be entirely attributed to them. And I don't think that the majority of the credit can go to them either. Because what matters about all actions and ideas is that they're received in a certain way, and that they're supported, or they're fought against, or they're met with apathy. And that kind of, that decides where an idea goes or where an action ends up. So world-changing ideas, like good and bad, don't just fall into someone's mind. The individual person gets an idea based on their interaction with the world. They have the confidence to whether to pursue that idea or not because of their interactions throughout life. And they either meet dissent and give up, or they're more motivated to keep pushing. They get validated because someone agrees with them, and they get support. And all these responses have a vital role in what the outcome for that idea or what that action is. And not only do I oppose this motion because I think it's untrue, but I also think that this encourages a harmful idea. The idea that the individual can change the world can lead to a harmful level of individualism where people become quite self-serving and competitive because they want to be the person who makes the change. They want the glory and the praise. And that's not to say that someone like Nelson Mandela was just in it for the glory. I think most individuals who are selfishly motivated like that are doomed to fail, and they won't make any change. And they usually fail because they're individually motivated. They don't understand that in order to change the world, you need other support, and you need to work with other people towards that common goal that you all have. If you buy into the idea that an individual can change the world, then you're likely to also buy into populistic ideals where you buy into viewing a single person as a savior who can do what they've promised you and give you the results that you hope for. And we can see that from Donald Trump's presidency, not good. So Donald Trump, he isn't an individual man changing the world. He has an entire administration, and he had a campaign team, and he had people who voted for him. But the point, so obviously, even everything he does is not on an individual level. But also, the people who voted for him believed that he'd be that individual to bring about all the change they wanted. And now that change isn't happening, and they've got eggs on their faces. I'm not here to give a speech about how change isn't possible and we should all be really depressed. I think leading on from what Cian said about how we do need to rage against the capitalist machine, we need to be collective, we need to take collective action and work together in order to achieve anything. And that can be seen if you talk about any changes that have altered the course of humanity. They all involve lots and lots of people getting behind one thing, whether that's good or bad things, like spread of organised religion, the invention of modern democracy, the spread of capitalism, various world wars and the peace processes that followed, political movements, scientific advancements and social movements are all involve lots and lots of people working together and going towards a common idea. And each of these, you could have certain names that you attach to them, but they all required huge groups of people to work with or against them to achieve the results that occurred. And even if you take it down a level or two, because as I said, you can expand what world means and retract it as based on how you want to view it. Look at the world we live in Ireland, even with Ireland. With the marriage equality referendum, that campaign consisted of so many people uniting for one cause and such varied motivations, whether it was you personally looking for your own rights or you simply wanting the people you love to be given an equal status in the law. All the main goal was just getting a yes vote. And the campaign was a success because so many people collectively wore the same t-shirt, the same badge. They went out, they canvassed, they became vocal. And most importantly, people got themselves to the polls. There was no assumption of, well, it's definitely going to pass because look at all those people look at all those other people are doing. There's nothing more I need to do. Everyone really did assume a collective responsibility in making those choices and making sure that people were informed about the injustices that they saw. And even if those are individual choices for each person, you only knew that the lack of a marriage equality was unfair because you knew that there was some sort of societal value on marriage, and you only know that because you exist within society. So it all comes down to coexisting and our relationships with each other and how we interact. And if you want to bring it down to a smaller level, because I'm feeling sentimental, because my last speech in the chamber, the Phil is a perfect example of great collective action and lots of people working together. I don't think, no offense Matthew, no individual does so much that they're going to change the Phil entirely. I think the Phil, what's brilliant about it is that it's so many, we do such bizarre work and we do so much of it for very little payoff other than the fact that we all get enjoyment out of it together. And it is a big collective campaign. It's a big collective action project, and that you see that all on Freshers Week and there's 30 billion people in maroon t-shirts as opposed to every other society which is lucky to have 5 people on a t-shirt at a time, and all that is just people getting together and working together because they enjoy the society and they enjoy like giving what the Phil gives to its members. So I think that like it's important to remember that like while lots of us are like individually great, I think what we do together is what matters, and that's what has the impacts on the world, whether it's the world on a wide scale or the world on like a smaller scale in your own individual life. Thank you, and I beg you to oppose. My pen.
Some things never change. Podium is still as shit as ever. I am not a sentimental man, but as this, thank you, Ludwine. As this is my last speech as an undergraduate, at least, in this debating chamber, I feel that it has a certain resonance for me, because come this time next week, or maybe a little bit more than next week after the AGM, I won't even be a member of the Phil for the first time since September 2012, because I will have lost my HMC status. And my regular membership will have lapsed. So I'd just like to say that it's been real, guys. It's been a good ride. So before I get into kind of the rest of my speech, I do want to address some of the stuff that Cian said. Essentially, what his entire speech was just a SparkNotes version of Das Kapital, right? I'm not about to really get into this debate with you, Cian, but I will point out that more people have been raised out of poverty over the last 30 years than have existed in the entirety of human history, but whatever. But I also think the problem with Cian's case is that it's hopelessly idealistic, right? It treats the world as he wishes it was, as opposed to the way it actually is, right? The kind of social movements that he so wants to succeed fracture all the time, right? So a common criticism of, for example, men in the LGBT movement has been that they've essentially, like, after achieving marriage equality, in many cases, like, throw women and trans people under the bus, right? Having achieved their own ends. And I think what this demonstrates is that people will always try and be self-interested and will always try to pursue their own ends regardless of the kind of idealistic picture that Cian wants to paint. So the point of this isn't to be like, oh, people are evil and will always act in their own self-interest. The point is to accept that premise as true and then accept that people will act in their own self-interest and plan accordingly, right? And the point isn't, and this is kind of related to the POI that I asked Cian, the point isn't that you should act in isolation, which is what Cian seemed to think I was saying, right? The point is that you need to take your initiative into your own hands, right? If you see that there is injustice in the world, then you should take steps to address that injustice. Because so the kind of social structures that Cian decries, and some of us might differ on whether or not they're good or bad, but all social structures are only as powerful as the individuals who make up those social structures, right? So we think kind of Cian's case falls by the wayside. Yeah, okay.
Do you think that humans are naturally selfish, or do you think that's shaped by the society in which they live?
Ooh, sociology. Come on, being here for like 4 years, Cian, it's like, yeah, well, even if it isn't like something that's inherent, like no one knows what inherent characteristics mean anyway, but the point is that we operate in a world where self-interest seems to be hard-baked into most people's actions. Even like people talk about the Phil being this wonderful collective, people act in their own self-interest all the time, people try to be like elected to certain positions, people just in general just like winning and like the acclaim of the people around them. And I don't think you're going to overturn that in one speech, no matter how good it was. So then kind of moving on to what Shannon was saying, and I think she's kind of illuminated a problem with this debate so far, right? In the sense that it kind of suffers from a chicken and egg dichotomy, right? Because obviously it is tautologically true that for an individual to change the world, that they need like the masses to also act, right? Steve Jobs didn't change the world on his own. He needed people to sell iPhones to, right? Donald Trump didn't change the world on his own. He needed people to vote for him, right? But the crux of this debate is whether or not it's enough for to just like wait for the inertia of history to play out and get the kind of social change that you guys want, or whether or not you need individual standard bearers to do that, right? We think on this side of the house, not only are those people, not only can those people change that world, that they're necessary to change that world. Why is this? 3 reasons. Firstly, because most people just don't like change, right? Most people just want to come home after a hard day's work and looking after their kids, put their feet up and read a book or watch TV or just go to a bar. Like, most people don't really care that much about that. Secondly, even if you did get a group of people that were like efficiently committed to implementing some goal, all those people would have differing conceptions of the kind of world that they wanted to live in, right? The kind of the men in the LGBT movement example, I think, illustrates this well, right? People would just have differing conceptions, and therefore that committee would go nowhere, right? And finally, the kind of crowds that these guys seem to want suffer from groupthink and bias and are in general prone to inertia, right? That is why it is always easier to get something done on your own rather than routing it through 20 different committees and having to pass it by everyone. Because, and even taking politics, which is, I think, the most charitable characterization of their case for this, and Keane's like cultural Marxist poppycock that he's trying to peddle here, like Trump, like as much as they'd like to say that Donald Trump isn't isn't there because of his individual efforts, he's kind of like representing overall angst, American angst about the way that the world is structured. The point is that no one but Donald Trump could have done what Donald Trump did. He's the only one who has the combination of money and name recognition that allows him to do what he did. And I think that's a perfect example. No, thank you, of that working out, right? Or not working out, depending on your political views. But I think finally then we would say that in terms of science, because like the biggest changes in history, regardless of what these guys want to tell you, aren't brought about by politics or culture. They're actually brought about by science and technology, right? If you traced it back far enough, the wheel probably wasn't invented by a committee of people. The wheel was probably invented by one really smart guy or woman who was like, oh, it's really difficult to just drag shit across the ground, and we need a better system of doing this. Similarly, like Einstein, like operating on his own, independent of most other researchers, essentially coming up with a radically different characterization of time. Like, we think that progress is ultimately driven by technology, and that the masses essentially respond to that change once it's already been implemented, leading to the kind of social movements that these guys want to talk about. And we think that it is only individuals that can have these brainwaves precisely because they're not subject to those kind of biases. So a quote which is often attributed to Henry Ford is that if I asked the average consumer what he wanted, he would have asked for a faster horse, right? Because people just couldn't conceptualize what it meant to build a car and just totally like alter the way that people move around. And ironically, this is the premise of radical politics, which I assume Keane likes very much. It's why Jeremy Corbyn persists day after day and like desperately tries to hold on to power, even though most of Britain doesn't seem to want what he's offering, right? Like, because people don't know what they want until they're given it. Like when Keane says, "Oh, are people inherently self-interested?" Well, like you would never be able to change the way people believe and like view their own self-interest if you didn't have like strong standard bearers giving impassioned speeches like the one that Keane did to be able to change their mind. So I think like if Keane's case wins, he loses essentially, right? So I know it's tricky. So I'm just going to end on this point, and it won't be a sappy thing. If we accept opposition's argument, then there's no point trying, right? Because the praxis of history will always be set against you. And Keane said that he didn't want to be depressive, but it was a little bit depressive in the sense that if he's right, then nothing matters, and there's no point implementing any social change. Because for me, as an individual, to interact to initiate that change would essentially like be bad. So for these reasons, we oppose this vile motion.
Thanks so much for his fine words, and I'd like to call on James Gallagher to continue the case for the opposition.
All right, so this is also my last time speaking in the chamber. Seems like a bit of a theme here, but I'll be back in 40 years to get a medal, so it's all right. But I would actually like to thank everyone on council and all the randos in the Phil for making my year abroad interesting and fun and kind of weird. So thank you very much. And yeah, sure. And now to transition to telling people why they're wrong. So Amy started out by saying we need to recognize why it's important to believe that you can change the world, to avoid apathy. And I think an interesting piece of literature to look at this would be Man's Search for Meaning of Viktor Frankl, searching for meaning in a concentration camp. And our side does not disagree with the idea that you should believe you can change the world. Anything that you need to do to avoid apathy is fine. And if you need that to function, then by all means go for it. The argument today is not, should you believe you can change the world? The argument is, can you actually change the world by yourself? Sheila talked about, in the middle of trying to insult people and rapping, about the dominoes falling. If you pull out your own domino, it's a great image. But the domino wouldn't have been in the position it was if it weren't for an interconnected web of interactions and the interactions of people in the natural world that put that domino there in the first place. So that's something important to think about. And third, Stepan, you managed to be kind of depressing on the optimistic side of the motion, which I just think is kind of cool. But you did say we need to take steps to address injustice, and no one on our side disagrees with that. We just think it's a more collective effort as opposed to an individual effort. So for the rest of my speech, I'm going to characterize this in three ways. I'm going to talk about how every movement and leaders need followers. Secondly, individual actions that would seem to have saved the world, and how those are not just the responsibility of one individual. And thirdly, I'm going to deal with the idea that you can change the world around you, which we've heard a bit about. So first, about every leader needing followers. So if you want to talk about a leader, you want to get people to agree with you, you talk about Martin Luther King. So Martin Luther King, great as he would probably be the first to admit that he would not have been able to accomplish much of anything if there weren't people who marched with him, if there weren't people who agreed with his ideas and followed his movement in the way that they did. You can talk about the Irish revolutionaries in the same way, in that people took up arms to follow these leaders, and all of the revolutionaries who came before the leaders who actually got it done in the end. You can talk about Genghis Khan or St. Vincent de Paul in the same exact way. They would not have been able to fundamentally change the world if it weren't for the people that followed them. And we've talked a lot about Donald Trump, and yeah, I managed to go from MLK and Michael Collins to Donald Trump. But, you know, he would have been nothing, and we've talked about the people who voted for him, but it's more than that. He would have been nothing without, you know, the small loan of $1 million that his father gave him. He would have been nothing without millions of interconnected interactions with other people and with the natural world that we can never fundamentally understand. We simply think that the world is more complicated than the other side is saying today. So movements are nothing without followers. Secondly, I want to talk about how circumstances often change the world, not individuals. So, someone who's often brought up as the man who saved the world is Stanislav Petrov, who was a Soviet colonel who, when he realized that it seemed as if the US had launched a nuclear strike against Soviet Russia, decided those reports were false and decided not to launch a retaliatory attack. So people often point to him and say, well, he saved the world. Well, not really. He saved the world in that immediate moment, but he wouldn't have been in that position if it weren't for the people who taught him, the people who put those rules in place, and for the interactions that placed him in the exact position that he was. Sure.
But isn't the point that his entire training and all the protocols around his actions were that he should have retaliated, but he went with his good intuition instead of that?
Okay, but here's what I want you to understand is that I'm not only talking about the people who trained him within the Soviet army, I'm talking about his upbringing, I'm talking about all the interactions that we'll never know about his life that led him to make that decision. You know, we never make a decision simply on our own accord, because our own accord is based on our interactions with other people and our background. So we're a product of each other and of our natural environment, and I think that's sort of an optimistic way of looking at things. I don't want to think that this is sort of a pessimistic side that we're on. And finally, I just want to point out that our side stands for nuance, their side stands for simplification of reality. And I want to go to a third point, which is about, it's an old Buddhist quote, or at least that's what the internet said, that you can't change the world, but you can change the world around you. And Sheila and Amy have talked about this. Amy was taught to debate, or we have these millions of individual stories that make up the world. And so I'll give you an example. Some people believe you can change the world around you by becoming a vegan and save a number of lives of animals every year, and that's objectively honorable. But you didn't reach that conclusion without the societal situations that led you there. Veganism is a concept within our society, and maybe you read that online or what have you. But what I'm trying to say here is that the decisions that we reach are not based on our own mind, and that we are all interconnected, and that's really the crux of the argument here. We could all choose to be nice to Matthew Newting and pretend not to notice his ear, and maybe and maybe that would change his world. But we wouldn't have been in that position to change his world if someone hadn't bitten half of his ear off. So the point being is that individually we cannot change the world. It's a combination of everyone together, and that's what I want to really get at. So what I'd like to stress in closing here is that our side is not deterministic. We don't think everyone has their lives mapped out for them before they were born. Free will still exists on our side. But you can only make decisions based on the cards that you're dealt, and no one person controls those cards. So thank you.
I'd like to speak for his final words. I'd like to call on Chris Costigan to continue the case for the proposition.
This will be the most difficult speech I'll have ever given. And I've given many, many speeches in all the times debated. I've been doing this rather pathetically since I think about 13 or 14 years of age. Because in September 2014, just around the time I was starting college, my mother was diagnosed with early onset frontal temporal dementia. What this meant was my life and my parents' life and my family's life was changed beyond all recognition. The woman who had raised me began to forget almost everything about her life. And at 19 years of age, I found myself in the rather unexpected position of having to become a carer. So that's why I wanted to speak in this debate. It wasn't because she changed my life in that negative way. It was because before that, she not only changed my life, but I refused to accept that she didn't change the world. She didn't get to invent anything. She didn't lead a grand movement. She didn't raise an army. But she made me who I am. She encouraged me to be outgoing, to speak out for myself, to when I see injustice, call it out, and even as a very shy boy in school, to do debating. And because I debated, I got to join the Phil, and I got to be here, and you've all been impacted by me, and friends I've made here have all been impacted by me. And I like to think your world is different because of that, and I've changed that world. But only also because of that, if you've met me and I've impacted your world at all, maybe I've changed you, and what that's done is caused you to be different and change the world around people who I never meet, who you get to meet, and so on and so on. Because without us, everything would be different. The tapestry of our stories would be completely changed if you were to take one single aspect of that and put something else there or get rid of it. Because my mother made an impact on everyone she ever met. I believe they would have lived different lives, and those people the people they interacted with would have lived different lives. And because of that, the individual does have matter and they does have value. In history, there is this myth. I've been talking about it a lot lately. It's the myth of the great man. It's that individuals who drive history are these people who come in, who are usually powerful, they're usually rich, and because of the unfortunate way history has gone to this point, they tend to be powerful, they tend to be white, and they tend to be men. History is, of course, problematic because it erases people's experience from that. Because social history is history that's driven from below. It's the stories of individuals who drive forward from the ground, who live completely normal and average lives for their time. But historians can go back and analyse what the world really was through them. Because we don't get to see what the world was through elites, because they lived a narrow, protected life, and they had their own interests and their own things that they wanted to protect. When we look at the stories of the average individual, we get a true meaning of what that world was. So when we go back and we look at the story of an average individual who lived at a time, and we analyse their stories, we analyse the records that they may have written, the diaries they may have written, when archaeologists look at the food they may have eaten or how they may have lived, that will always tell us more. Those individuals do change the world because we learn from that history and we go on from that. But moreover, it's people who see injustice and call it out. Because there's this concept, like the diffusion of responsibility. It's this idea that if a car crashes in the middle of the road, and it does so on a motorway, no one stops because people keep driving by because they assume someone else will do it. Whereas when that happens in rural areas, people do tend to stop their cars and get out. That's it, right? Someone else is going to do it. Someone else is going to call this out. Someone else is going to say that this isn't acceptable. Someone else is going to say that it's not all right that certain minorities in society are treated worse because of arbitrary characteristics. That's not my place. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not knowledgeable enough to do that. I have a family. Things could go bad if I tried to do that. And so everyone says that, and everyone rationalizes that it's not their place. And then no one speaks out, and no one makes the world better. Because the collective does matter, and I do broadly agree with nearly everything Cian said in his speech. But I still do believe someone has to set it up. Someone has to be inspiring and has to give the speeches and tell people that they can do it. That in the moments when the movement is struggling and when the forces from above, the force of capital Cian talks about, are crushing these people and driving their will, that people can still inspire them to continue on. That is why we need leaders. That is why we need people. And you don't need to be incredibly well educated or incredibly knowledgeable to be that leader. The experiences of the world around you and of your unique knowledge of your community can be and make you that driving force. To be a leader, all you need to do is understand your people and inspire them. And I think that in doing that, that is inherently an individual saving the world or changing the world even. But of course, we have a world around us that we make, that we are part of a wider, complex tapestry of. As I said in my introduction, if I wasn't here, I'd like to think the world was different. But that doesn't just go for me. I mean, if there are people in this room who, if I never got the opportunity to meet, my life would be incredibly different. It would be substantially worse off. And because of that, when I go and interact with people, I'd interact with them differently, and I'd shape their lives differently as well. Because even if this isn't true, it's comforting and important, because it's important for us all to know that we are not a drop in history, but we are something that made a real, meaningful, tangible difference, and that we can make a real, meaningful, tangible difference. I want you to imagine a world without you as an individual. A world without all the times you've made someone smile and you've made someone laugh. A world without all the times you told someone that you love them, or have had someone feel in such a way that they could tell you that they love you. A world without you inspiring people, a world without you telling people your stories, a world without you is a world that is infinitely poorer, it is a world that is infinitely worse off. Because you do matter. We all matter. And you don't have to raise a grand army. I've talked about that at the start to change the world. You simply just have to interact with people and treat them with respect and make them want to remember you. Because for some people, you will be their entire world. It is possible to imagine that, be that your partners, or be that your children, or be that your parents, you are their entire world. My mother doesn't get out much because of her illness, and myself and my father are her entire world. And I like to think that I've changed it, in that when I'm there looking after her, when she's scared or afraid or wandering around the house, that I make her feel better. And because of that, I've changed the world. At least I've changed hers. Because without me, maybe she wouldn't have that. Without that, maybe my dad wouldn't have as much time to be on respite care. And without that, my dad wouldn't enjoy his life as much. And then the people, his interactions with his family wouldn't be as good. People in this room have changed my world. And they will change it maybe in that way, or maybe they'll go on to change it in a far bigger way than I can possibly ever begin to comprehend. But you all have that individual capacity within you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm incredibly happy to have met so many of you. And I'm incredibly happy that I got to know my mother, both in the time in which she was a boisterous, adventurous woman who used to annoy me to no end but mattered so much to me. But I also accept that her life is no less valuable now simply because she doesn't remember as much as she used to. I love her still, and she has still absolutely, completely changed my world. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
thank Chris for his kind words. Now I'd like to call on Anna Nichols to close up the case of the opposition and lead the debate as a whole.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow speakers, my mum and dad in the corner over there. Before beginning, I'd just like to maybe speak for everyone in the room and thank Chris for what was definitely really moving, and it's definitely made me reconsider some of the jokes I was going to open with, because I just don't think it'd be the right thing to do and give some of what he said the kind of the credence and atmosphere that maybe it deserves to have. So we might skip the parts about jokes about finding dog poo on the floor after an event we organised in second year, and how that was really funny and does definitely tie into collective action. So swiftly moving on. I think really kind of a lot of what both sides have been talking about this evening, I don't think we disagree on a lot of what we're talking about. We're really kind of getting at, two sides of the same coin. We both don't, neither sides are denying the fact that human beings can make change, and that, people are able to make a change. And I think we're both in agreement that there are certain viewpoints that can kind of deny us the ability to see that. And I think that's really kind of getting to what we've been trying to make a point about, and the fact that we're not really disagreeing at all with the proposition and this idea that the change can occur. And what really the difference is the fact that the reality of how that change takes place, and the problems when we don't recognise the web in which those interactions lie, and the fact that our actions don't exist. Our actions don't exist in a vacuum. They don't have no repercussions. Even if sometimes we really rather wish they didn't. And we're not agreeing with the notions and capacities we have. And really kind of finally, like somewhat what I mean by those kind of difference in perspectives, the fact that our actions, like that what change is, so change is contingent on it's contingent on circumstances. It is a social construct. If 4 years of law and political science have taught me anything, it's that everything is a construct, and including this whole concept of what it means to be a change maker and how we apply that idea. So with that in mind, I kind of have two main points that we're going to be talking about, and one is this idea that actions don't exist in a vacuum, and change is contingent on circumstance, and that really does take a village. There will be a few Instagram type quotes, but you know what? I think for the evening in it, they have a point for both sides. And really this idea that we kind of do have a problem with the idea of change that we present to ourselves and that we sell ourselves, and really this idea of like the individual that we so desperately hang on to, and really kind of does all of us an injustice. So like James has said, every follower needs its leader. And we've heard some nice things from the proposition about this person did this and this person engaged with that. And we don't deny that it's nice that individual actions can be nice and they can have nice effects, but it doesn't really account for the reality in which those actions take place and what really leads up to those actions having an impact. It's wrong to credit an individual as a sole actor in those constances, because any kind of actions, we're so reliable on the people in the future and the people who receive those actions and the people that we're directing those actions towards. We're so reliant on their reception to really kind of give any of that substance or meaning. Like we heard from Sheila, there's some things, it's, about tweets sparking actions or, sparking change. But, at the end of the day, those ideas and those sparks, they're only actions, their potency and their delivery and their effect. It has to be received in a particular way. And that action of the individual isn't really what the change is. It's that reception. And then when that reception is widespread and when it's positive, that's where the change occurs. And, taking that a step further, it's the unity of support that derives from that positive act, that derives from that positive response and that emotive response and that potency and that that ability to really tap into people's feelings. And that's really what makes that change impactful. And I think it's really misleading then to keep holding up this idea that action by the individual is what the change is, because it's not. It's that collective response that we also buy into that action, and we also believe that action has value and that action can do something that actually affords it any sort of, galvanization and for being any sort of catalyst for affecting that. We see that when we talk about, these leaders and it is, leaders and how they need their support. I mean, like Beyonce, we can talk about her being everything that can save us without 2016, but if it wasn't for Tina's management techniques, that's really not an option to be discussing. And, you can't change a world and you can't do those things without there's interconnections aligning and, really understanding why they're so important and, acknowledging the fact that it is accumulation of those things and those processes that gives those moments an opportunity. And I think maybe there's two very, potent examples of that, like like all our behaviour is a product of those interactions, and so many of these defining moments in history that we define as change, we conceive as change, we uphold to be change, they're a really fortunate convergence of a lot of very different things, and and it's when those responses come together that's when you deliver it. And to really change the world, you need that collective response in which you can project your action, in which it can galvanise it. And it's easier to say that the individual prompts a narrative because that sells this idea to people that it can be them, that they can do things, that they can have agency. But really, like, it's reductive, it's untrue, and it actually really denies, and in all truth, it actually just denies us our ability to recognise where our agency constitutes change, because the idea that your actions have an effect on people and the fact that you can also be part of something bigger than yourself, they're not two mutually exclusive things. And it's really kind of, problematic to view it like that, because then you really kind of leave this idea of a change maker to people who only have the, who are upheld to have certain resources to command it, and leaves so many people out of the equation where they don't see examples of themselves being like that. And we've heard criticism of this idea of the chicken and the egg, and that's this kind of the silly idea that we're getting at. But the reason why that's so difficult to unpack, and in identifying a moment where maybe like identifying a moment where like change is truly made, is because it just kind of, you can't get, it's only indicative of the fact you can't really get away from like the heart of this idea of the connectedness of human interaction, and it's the transmission of an idea and not the idea itself that affects change. And with that in mind, I think two examples of this where this really comes about is we look at the example of Rosa Parks and we laud her as this like spark that changed the human rights movement. But like 2 weeks earlier, a pregnant 14-year-old called Claudette Colbert was in the exact same situation, in being refused a bus, and no one acknowledged her like that. We see the same thing with Jocelyn Bell Burrell, for a good science example to rally back at Uncle Stepsy there, and in discovering, making really important scientific discoveries, but her professor being the one awarded the Nobel Prize and lauded as the change maker and the person who like ultimately upheld that catalyst for scientific change, and being the person who did it. And that's two examples in two very different contexts of where two people did the same action, but it was really the circumstances that gave them the impetus and the ability to actually have that place in history as being held up as the person who makes change. So if anything, looking back on history doesn't inform us about why that person was a special sunflower or a special snowflake or whatever you want to call it who did that. It really just kind of like outlines like the circumstances which happen to be favourable for that change to take place, and it's really kind of reductive to pretend that doesn't happen, because when you do that, do you deny people the reality of the fact that for some people it is more difficult to make change than others, and not everybody has the same access to ability to make change as maybe you do, whether that's in your class, in your home life, and it really just kind of disregards the whole subsection of things and kind of like fails to bring people along in your idea of what change means, because like it's constantly going back to the same group of people who already fit these grooves and these ideas of what we have, and it just ignores the nuance and the reality of what context and reception and like the inevitable, everything that the inevitable connectedness of human interaction entails. So with that in mind, like you're not really changing the world if you keep excluding, precluding people, the ability for other people to engage in that change, and for those who need it most. I was going to use the example of the Grinch when he's making his diary and says solve world hunger, tell nobody. But like the point is that like an idea is great, but if you don't have the context in which to spread that idea, and you don't have the people who can bring it behind you. So with that in mind, do yourselves a favour and really choose nuance and not oversimplified ideas, because making a difference and being part of something that also does that, shouldn't be precluded from each other. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure, and I beg to oppose.